Hey, thanks. Thank you all for watching. This is here with Vishal Amin from Microsoft, and we want to have a little discussion about CMMC, how Microsoft is approaching the new CMMC rules, and talk a little bit about what we do here at Security Bricks. Vishal, thanks for coming over all the way up the coast
Thanks for
to
having me.
Bellevue, and welcome.
No, thanks for having me. I know there's a lot going on in the CMMC space. At Microsoft Federal, it's really important to us, especially as the new rule has rolled out. I know there's a lot of conversations, there's a lot of podcasts, there's a lot of effort going towards the new CMMC initiatives.
Yeah.
And we are really excited to be supporting Security Bricks and our customers as well, especially in interpreting their work moving forward.
So, Vishal, I want to start. I mean, it's fascinating about the journey. You were a fighter pilot. You then went into, cyber defending. You worked for the federal, in the Microsoft Federal Division. What do you see that? Because a lot of people ask, is CMMC? We as C3PAOs, we go in and people go, is it a checklist? Why is it really important? What's CUI? Where do I start? And of course, by default, Microsoft is one of the largest, cloud providers for the federal government, which means the defense and their industrial base. How would you start with? If I was I think it's good to put light on why is CMMC important? What's CUI?
Right.
Why start with what's going on and why is it now? People were not expecting this till 2025, and suddenly here it is on December 13, 2024. It's going to become a law and then go into contracts. So give me a little bit background so people learn to appreciate, because I see a lot of people saying, I got to go to my leadership and ask for investment in
Right.
CMMC. And how is it going to impact our revenue, right? How is it going to impact our sales and our business with the federal government?
Their ability to gain contracts, their
Exactly.
ability to work with the federal government. There's a lot to unpack there. I had a wonderful career in the Marine Corps. I got to fly F-18s. I got to be part of the special operations community, and none of it was technical. But I'll say everything I did in the 21 years that I was in involved data in some facet. And I think that's one thing we've learned as a community is data encompasses everything we do. And what differentiates good and bad, and especially in the intelligence community, is the type of data that these good and bad actors are trying to possess or trying to take or trying to steal or infiltrate. And that's where CUI comes in. See, in the Department of Defense or any federal agency, or even not in the Department of Defense, controlled unclassified information is sensitive information. It could be anything from medical records. It could be the architecture of your servers. It could be your home address. It could be your name. It could be associated with a phone number. There's all these different elements of data that can be sensitive when you put it to action, when you put it to a mission. And every warfighter and every agency is, I wouldn't say victim to that, but sensitive to that. It is important to the mission. When I retired from the Marine Corps, I retired because of essentially a compromise of my CUI. And the first questions I had without being a cybersecurity professional was, how did my CUI get compromised by a bad actor? And that compromise of CUI put my own personal welfare and my physical welfare, my family's welfare in harm's way and at risk. And when you really look at CUI, that is what we're protecting. We're protecting information when accessed can do harm or do bad. And I think that's where we all have to pause as a community. When we look at CMMC and we look at the intent behind CMMC, we're not just looking at physical controls, which I know we'll get into in a little bit.
Yeah.
We're looking at the intent behind CMMC, which all started with CUI. We're looking at how do we host, classify, identify, protect CUI and mitigate that type of risk as we continue to execute on our missions. And that ranges from the Department of Defense all the way through our agencies. CUI is really the core premise of CMMC, and it's an important concept to realize because even though I love as an F-18 guy, I love checklists. Everything I do is checklists.
Yeah.
But I will say that this isn't a checklist. You have to know, what your controls are, how to mitigate the technology risk, but how do you mitigate training your people the right way? How do you educate them for an outcome-based approach to mitigating that type of risk? How do you put zero trust frameworks around this? And zero trust, again, isn't a checklist.
Yeah.
It's a way to think about mitigating risk. So CMMC really puts all that together and helps us quantify the risk and mitigate that risk at different levels so that we can continue to work with our mission partners, our federal government.
Awesome. Because I can tell you, as a C3PO, when we are accredited, one of the things was when you submit a SSP, right, as a contractor or as a organization seeking certification, the idea is not if you meet the control, but it's also the intent of the control. And as you rightly said, it's not all technical. I could be physically printing out. I could be making, I could have equipment that has CUI. There's a specialized equipment. Because people get confused a little bit because when we put our FedRAMP 3PO hat, it's all about what's in the cloud. How is the federal data
Right.
flowing in the cloud? So everything is virtual, right? But when you get down to CMMC, it's a very different. It's same access controls, same multi-factor encryption, but for different environments.
Well,
right?
I think it's really great when organizations can see that from that third-party entity. I think a lot of organizations that we work with at Microsoft as well, in all shapes and sizes, maybe some of them might think, hey, I have to be level 1, level 2, maybe the bigger ones, level 3,
yeah.
right? But what's my easy switch? What's the silver bullet? And some organizations will say, well, just put the whole organization on GCC High. Put the whole organization in the GovCloud, and we'll operate that way. I think when you look at it that way, sure, that could be an easy solution. You can go through our service trust portals. You can get all your documentation. You can put it in with a CMMC accelerator, let's say through Security Bricks or a partner, and you can assess if you are compliant, if you meet one of those levels. But what most organizations don't understand is it's not that easy, because organizations aren't really built just to do work with the US federal government. What you just said is really key, because most organizations aren't in a single cloud. They aren't just using Microsoft GCC High.
Yeah.
They have multiple clouds. They're on premises.
Yes.
Maybe a majority of their revenue comes from the commercial side. Maybe all their collaboration comes on the enterprise side.
Yes.
So you really have to identify what type of organization you are, where your infrastructure sits, how you utilize it, and what part of that organization makes sense for you to start building those frameworks around, so that, sure, you can make it easy from the Microsoft side of the house, where you have the Office 365 side and then the Azure side. And note, you have to understand what services sit in what for us. And you can pull that document together. But that's not going to be enough. You actually have to know all the other pieces that are non-cloud related. And so as a CSP, one of our responsibilities is to try to make it easy for you, but it's not a one-stop shop.
And actually, we'll segue into that for a minute, where we typically hear from small to mid contractors about, how do I become CMMC compliant? Like, where do I start? What do I buy? Like you said, is there one easy button that I press and I spend this money and not? But I think the other important factor that we see is that there's a lack of people who understand CMMC. They understand what the controls are, right? So there's limited number of qualified assessors, the CCAs. There are a few hundred of them. Those are the people who are certified to assess. And there's a limited number of people who actually can go in and implement. I mean, there is a shortage of people who can work on GCC High, who are credentialed, who have the expertise and the certifications. So it complicates, right? Now, we released a tool in the Azure cloud as one of our first CMMC accelerator, only because we said it will now help you automate. Our belief is automation with human validation. It's not about just automate, right? You automate what you can, but you have someone to validate. So I think our approach for the accelerator was same, which is if you are, irrespective of small, large, if you reside on a Microsoft cloud, how can you validate that your controls that you have implemented are ready, or make you audit ready, right? Are going to make you CMS ready. But I want to go back to the other one you just earlier talked about, GCC High. One of the
Sure.
common things I get is we have heard, for example, I heard way back in May from a defense supplier who said, "Hey, we acquired a small firm because that firm could not, afford to be CMMC. So we're gonna, but they have a unique skill set. They do something very specialized, but they're not big enough to go themselves. So we acquired them. We acquired their technology, and so a lot of people feel like, will CMMC kill our business? Right? Is it too heavy? On the flip side, there are people saying, okay, I know I have to, can my current commercial cloud, for example, handle
Right.
CUI? Now, the answer is no. The commercial clouds, the Microsoft Azure commercial clouds cannot, are not certified to handle CUI or store CUI or process CUI. So let's talk a little bit about, if I was a small company and I have today my business going into using the commercial Azure cloud, just as a hypothetical example, and I have all the controls, and now suddenly I've been told I have to go to CMMC and I have to go to GCC High, I have to be a level 2, right? My prime's telling me I have to do it to keep my business going. How would they approach it? How would you give them some guidelines as to, just go in and search and just get, or is there it's like, build small, right? Now, crawl, run,
Sure.
walk, or crawl, walk, run. What some tips that you can tell people how
I
to
think the
think about?
first thing that people can do, number one, is pause and realize you're not behind. You're right where you're supposed to be. I think most organizations feel that maybe they're behind on their
Agreed.
accreditation,
Yeah.
their
Yeah.
certification, and they're playing catch up. I think one of the things that is really important to understand right away is that there's controls you could put in place right now before even going to GCC High and those best practices that can really help you in the journey. So I'm really talking about that GRC space, the governance, risk, compliance space. When we start talking about Entra, we start talking about Purview,
Yeah.
and the data classification, and all of those best practices are things that organizations can start doing now. Before you implement the technology, those things have to be set in place before you can even turn on the tools to help you automate those workflows. Number two, work with your teams at Microsoft. It's not hard to contact Microsoft and be able to go apply for a GCC High tenant and go through that application process and understand how to purchase it and then start turning it on, because there's multiple resources available at Microsoft to help you do that.
Oh, that's great.
We have entire teams, from our federal business to our manufacturing business to our global black belt teams, that are dedicated to the government community, the GCC High tenants. And that's everything ranging from GCC all the way through GCC High to the DoD side of the house. So I think the first thing our customers, and especially the smaller firms or any firm, can do, number one, is take an inventory of where you are right now. How much of that GRC workflow have you already established and started going down the path on? And then from there, you have to make the determination how much of the organization that you are working with is actually working with the federal government. Which part of that are 100% of your employees all interacting with CUI? Or is it just the new organization that's coming on, which may be 10% of the organization? I think there's great individuals at Microsoft that have said this in the past, like Richard Wakeman has said, there's organizations that are 100,000 users, but maybe only 10,000 users are actually working with the federal government. So does that mean you put 100,000 users into GCC High? No, you have to identify how the size and what part of the organization is actually working with the CUI, and then license appropriately. Now, there are some pros and cons that you will have to determine with Microsoft or your partner of being able to swivel seat between two organizations, right? I think a lot of organizations would really love to know as well that Microsoft actually is one of those organizations. We actually have a GCC
Yeah.
high environment
Yeah.
and a commercial environment.
Yeah.
Our federal business runs in both.
Yeah.
And we swivel seat. Now, we also have to meet the intent of why we're utilizing the GCC high environment, what data we're putting in there, and we have to have best practices on what to use and when to use it. But that's where an organization should start. Identify what you're doing already and what part of your organization is actually impacted with your federal business.
So going down that path, then I would say take your ecosystem, like you said, say a few hundred people. How many of them are actually touching CUI? Is it a fair? Or how many are handling or working with CUI, right?
Right.
And try to move them to this new.
I think you start in steps. You move them first.
Got it.
Right, because what you're ultimately doing as well in moving that portion of your organization to, let's call it, a more governed or more compliant state, is you're building in risk mitigation and resiliency into your build, into your architecture, right? When you really talk about what CMMC is really trying to do, is you're looking at your stack and you're looking at essentially that supply chain risk in depth. And you want to mitigate risk at those different levels. And by taking that small sample first and then building out from there, you're essentially building trust with your customers as well. And that's ultimately what this is about. This isn't about hitting a checkbox. This is about going to the customer, going to the federal government, saying, hey, we are taking the necessary steps, level 1, level 2, level 3, to work with you so that you can mitigate any type of supply chain risk.
I think that last point you made was clear, because I think CMMC is everyone's, it's a mission basically to protect national, security data, right? It's CUI, and if you're going to do business handling these, it's your fiduciary duty to make sure you're protected.
One of the trends that I'm seeing in the cybersecurity community, and especially in the national security space, where I'm pretty intimately involved in a couple different facets, is we're seeing organizations, and more so nations and states around the world, trying to establish their own sovereign environments.
Interesting.
And the reason I bring that up is because when you could do that, it's almost like you want to control where everything is. You want to be able to have all your data harnessed in one spot, right? It mitigates all the risk external to that sovereign environment. It allows you to have an air-gapped environment. We do this in the Department of Defense, right? When we look at our IL6 environment, it's air-gapped. Microsoft was a trailblazer in having Azure Secret, right? When we look at the air-gapped environment, there's a reason why our U.S. government customers use it. Now, not every organization can afford to invest in an air-gapped environment, build an air-gapped environment. And there is dependencies on the commercial environments that allow them to do the business, right? So I think when you work back from what these nations are trying to do to what really CMMC is all about, what you're really talking about is how do we get to a place where we could trust everything, but we have dependencies on pieces of our infrastructure and our build that are vastly spread across multiple regions. And that's where CMMC comes in. It allows us to build that trust in layers for us to be able to almost operate like we're in a sovereign environment, yet we're not. And I think that's it, right? Is building the resiliency in those different levels.
So I want to go back to another point about, you made GCC high, and typical thing we ask customers, come and say, okay, I know I have to go CMC, I have to go GCC high. So I subscribe, to this GCC high. I moved 50 users. Am I compliant? And we talk about responsibility matrix, things that are inherited from Microsoft Cloud, things that are shared, like an MFA and other things, and things that you own, things that are not necessarily part of this. So there, people talk about body of evidence. It gets for a small supplier, it gets a little bit overwhelming, right? Hey, wait, I have things in cloud. I'm paying all this, money for this. What am I missing, right? So can you talk a little bit about how how Microsoft has. I've seen some Richard Wickerman's blogs, and I know few others have spoken about how do you get these body of evidence, how do you help. Are there resources, are there because we as C3POs tell us, we are, what we expect to see is, tell us what the responsibility matrix looks like. Tell us, it doesn't matter if it's cloud or it's another tool provider. Just tell us how we've implemented, so that what comes out of the box that is inherited from the provider that they are responsible for, what is it that's shared, and then what is owned by the OSC, the contractor themselves. Give a little bit about how people should view that, and how should they approach it, because there, for example, to buy a GCC high, you have to go to an authorized reseller.
Right.
The authorized reseller may not be the person who's implementing it, and then the person who's and the company is auditing. So you've got various people in the stream before you get to your audit.
Sure.
And the question would be, anything you can shed light on how they can go approach it, or anything that you can give some tips.
I think
so that
one of the first things that comes to mind is that shared responsibility matrix is the beauty of being a cloud service provider. And shared responsibility matrix doesn't shed the responsibility from the government provider to the cloud organization, but it allows the cloud organization to pick up the heavy load. And we published some of those the bodies of evidence within our Service Trust portal, which we have in Office 365 and Azure, and you could pull those from our Service Trust portal. But with that being said, those policies have to be derived from the organization first. How much of that shared responsibility model are you taking accountability for as a government provider? And I think as one of those cloud service providers, it's our responsibility to meet our customers where they are and make it easy for them to access those bodies of evidence, which we do very commonly. The one piece behind your question, though, that I thought we should kind of talk about is, this is where most organizations struggle. Is they're small organizations, under-resourced, and they don't realize that a lot of this can be done for them.
Okay.
Right? So through the Service Trust portal, through tools like Microsoft Sentinel, right, and Azure Policy, you can actually utilize these tools to source the data and aggregate all the information you need in a way to give it to the third-party auditors. Now, with all that being said, there's also accelerators that are built in. I love the fact that you brought up how you have an accelerator in the Azure Marketplace. I think the Azure Marketplace is instrumental for our customers to be able to access what they need as a service to be able to meet the intent of where they're trying to go. And it keeps the billing and it keeps everything compact for them and easy. That's really key for especially the smaller defense industrial-based organizations to make it easy and simple. So though Microsoft has that shared responsibility and has the ability to utilize Azure Policy and Sentinel and other tools, as well as our Service Trust portal to bring those body of evidences together, I think those CMMC accelerators really tie all of that together. They're the glue that binds all that information with all those intangible, non-technical requirements that are required with CMMC that really make things a little more maybe confusing for a lot of these organizations.
No, I think it's fair, because when we started to design the accelerator, thanks to your team's help, Lily and others, we looked at how you guys had developed workbooks for Zero Trust, right? We were very fascinated by how you did. So we kind of took that as our first learning, as a foundation to build this. And Sentinel was was the source. It where all the signals, as you call it, come in. And for us, it was very easy. So I think the idea is that, the ability for, like you rightly said, which is, creating the policies, but validating what you implemented against those policies takes a lot of, it makes it easy for the contractors to, as they keep testing and validating. You brought up a point on policies. So is there a formal and I just, is there, I know CMMC's finally come out. Microsoft's done a lot of work even before, like in 2022, you already had started your placemats and started talking about CMMC
Right.
1.0 and stuff. Is there CMMC formally going into purview, and is there plans to make it into a compliance part of your compliance, framework, so that people now have more than just, what a 800 171 has, but much more data that goes behind evidence, and some of the things that they can pull out.
Absolutely. I mean, as soon as this started rolling out, the placemats were already being developed. You can already start attesting and tracking through each line through our native tools.
Yeah.
But I still don't think that mitigates having the ability to bring in a third-party organization and tie it all together. Again, Microsoft, we can do that with our own tools and attestate to that. But what about the non-tangible technology requirements that are also involved with CMMC? Because if you just do that, it's a checklist, right? If you just map the tools that you own and how you operate it, it's a checklist.
Yeah.
But the training, all of those other things
agreed.
that are associated, those aren't part of what you can do with us, right? So that's where the accelerators come in. But to your point, yes, they are out there. They are available now. And you can follow Richard Wickman, you can follow Carly Salmon, even a lot of the collaborations that you guys have done.
Yeah.
Right. But I will say that understanding how that accelerator can help you put that together, that's where the magic sauce is.
So I want to, if you work very closely with DoD, I mean, that's what you spend all your 8 hours a day working with them. From their point of view, how do they view CMMC? I mean, so it came from the DoD as part of, hey, we want to make sure that we have a benchmark, we have a regulation, we have a set of standards.
Sure.
When we share information with our industrial base, that they're protecting. This is the whole a premise of CMMC. How are they viewing it today? Are they all saying yes, it's going to come into contracts, you're going to really start to scrutinize to make sure that you are, and not just you, but your entire contract flow down? Because there are A equals B equals, I mean, like 4 or 5 levels. How you spend every day, I'm assuming you're doing zero trust with them, you're helping them protect. Now, what's their lens on this?
I think this is a good spot as we start wrapping and tying up, is the perspective of the DoD. We have to understand that they are mission focused. That is what they're about. So it's not that they want to accelerate the contracts, make it easy. They need that type of, I would say, workflow to work seamlessly. They need these contracts to be secure and all the risks to be mitigated so that they could get the technologies into the warfighters' hands when they need them. I will say that working with the Department of Defense leadership, not just the technology leadership, but the mission leadership, the warfighters aren't going to pause impacting and achieving their mission because of CMMC. But CMMC can help protect the warfighters as they achieve their missions and mitigate all the risks associated with the work they're doing. The faster we can work together and the faster industry can come together and provide that to them, right? Remember, the Department of Defense isn't a private sector organization. They're a mission-focused organization. And that's what they think about. They don't think about how fast they can get a contract through. Maybe they think about how fast they can get a service through, a technology through, an innovation through, so they can put it in the hands of the warfighter. But it's an intent-based mindset is what I hear daily.
Okay. So I want to wrap up with a couple of last thoughts. One is, how do you see something like a CMMC? How you travel the world? You just spoke in Singapore. You were in Warsaw. How are others viewing similar programs in their own countries, Australia or Canada or something else? And are they have similar regulations or similar type of guardrails that they want to? That's one question. And I want you to end a little bit about Spades Institute. It's very interesting for people to understand how passionate you are about national defense and how it's not just about technology, like you said. And it is amazing to see that you have extended this so-called mission that when you came out and said, this is what I want to do. It's more than just a technology company. So I'd love to hear both, and then
Sure.
we can wrap up. So
Sure. I mean, I would say when I speak to our government leaders, not just here in the United States, but globally, I think protecting data is key. So it may not be the same process and the same directives as CMMC, but CUI is top of mind for every government entity. This is why we see an increase in sovereign environments globally. So with that in context, without focusing on the program itself, the premise of the program is truly top of mind for everyone. CUI and personal information and information that is sensitive to governments is really the cornerstone and the key of every cyber initiative globally. And I think anyone who goes to any country or any region in the world will see that. Thank you for bringing up Spades. I'm very passionate about Spades. Spades Institute is a national security nonprofit that empowers both our government organizations and our private sector organizations to have what we call commander action groups or closed forum conversations with industry professionals without any repercussion. So being able to bring industry experts to government and being able to bring government experts to industry to have candid, honest conversations to drive the interests of national security to build a more democratic and very ethically strong nation. And I think that's what Spades Institute's heart and initiatives are truly at. And we're so proud of the work we're doing, whether it's speaking at global conferences, working with the United States government, and having and facilitating small group conversations to educate them on the innovations that are happening, as well as national security threats and interests. And then also with private sector organizations, sharing with them what our national security leaders are saying and where they would like us to build as private sector. I'll end with one of the things we always talk about is private and public sector partnership.
Yeah.
And I think we speak about it all the time, but Spades Institute is a place where we're actually doing it.
Awesome.
And I think that's something that anyone can do. You don't need a nonprofit to do it. If you don't do it, someone else will. And I think, and we're proud to host that. And Microsoft and Security Bricks, I mean, every organization that I have the opportunity to work with, we're trying to all do more good, and we're contributing back to society in different ways. So thank you for giving us the opportunity.
I think it's a great platform, and I think I'm very inspired. I mean, everything you do every day that you post on LinkedIn and things you're doing, it's very fascinating that you're on a mission. You're very focused on what you want to do. I think it's inspiring especially when I point this all to our veterans. Like, as you know, we have a lot of veterans. We have a lot of service members who transition.
You do.
It's exciting to tell them a role model. Hey, here's Vishal. Look at it, and it's good because they see where they can make an impact. Not where they made an impact in the service, but coming out, they can still make an impact in the national security and the national interest. It's huge. I think it is truly, especially the platform you've done. So I'm, fortunate to have known you for some time, had the ability to collaborate with you and your team. I can't thank you enough for your support.
It was very kind of you, and thank you for having me.
We'll catch up. Thank you.
All right.
Have a good one.